This week on Bloomberg Government's Capital Gains, avoiding a fiscal cliff and getting to a deal. If it can be done, Dick Durbin will be at the table. We talked to the number 2 Democrat in the U.S. Senate. Got a big Washington speech? These guys will put words in your mouth for a price. And will the government finally power down and safely stow its ban on airplane cell phones? I'm Peter Cook. Welcome to Bloomberg Government's Capital Gains. If your business is Washington, you'll want to stay with us for the next half an hour, and every Sunday, we will bring you exclusive research from Bloomberg Government on the impact of government action on business and the economy. You'll hear from the newsmakers who are making those policy decisions. So if you want to know what your government is up to, stay tuned for perspective and analysis you won't get anywhere else. So let's get started with some of this week's winners and losers. First up, Romney Care. Mitt Romney says he'll repeal the president's health care law if elected, but what would he replace it with? Bloomberg Government combed through 15 Romney health care proposals for the answer. Many health insurers would be net winners under Romney. Hospitals and Medicare providers would benefit from changes to malpractice laws, but Medicaid cuts would leave hospitals net losers. And our analysis suggests fewer Americans would carry health insurance under Romney's plan than under the current system. Bloomberg Government also tracking a local idea that could spook bond investors if it took hold nationally. Officials in San Bernardino County, California, considering using the power of eminent domain to seize underwater mortgages. They'd pay at most 85% of the home's current value. It's an idea other communities are considering. The big winners under the plan, municipalities could finally clear troubled mortgages from their communities. The big losers, mortgage bond investors. The idea took hold nationally, they could potentially take a 30% hit, according to Moody's. And we've crunched the numbers on where the fiscal cliff budget acts will fall. We've heard lawmakers criticize the $55 billion in automatic defense cuts set to kick in next year, but non-defense agencies face a similar $55 billion hit as well. The winner, if you want to call it that, the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's largely exempt from the cuts. The big loser, the Department of Health and Human Services, to the tune of at least $7 billion. Well, the fiscal cliff hangs like a cloud over Washington right now. One critical player in all the negotiations is Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the U.S. Senate. I spoke with him in his Capitol office and began by asking his level of confidence a deal can be reached before the end of the year.
I'm going to give you an answer that sounds very self-serving from a political point of view, but it's true. If President Obama is reelected, I believe we can avoid the cliff. He has a plan. He is prepared for it. I can't say the same for the other candidate. I have no idea what his plan is, if he has one.
Right now, there are a lot of people questioning whether or not there is a plan on the table from the president, from anyone for that matter. Are there talks happening behind the scenes this week here on Capitol Hill that we're not hearing about?
Yes. And I will tell you that at the executive level, that Tim Geithner, Gene Sperling, the folks in the White House have been thinking about the possibilities and where they will go come the day after the election and before December the 31st. At the congressional level, the conversations continue. The Gang of 8, 4 Democrat, 4 Republican senators that I've been part of for 2 years or more, still continues to meet and talk about what we can put on the table too, so that we won't be empty-handed after the election.
Are you talking about a deal right now in a lame duck session, a grand budget bargain, or are you talking about something that's going to have to happen in 2013?
Well, here's what I think we can do. Here's what I think we should do. We should decide during the lame duck session how much deficit reduction we want to achieve over a 10-year period. I think it's likely to be $4 trillion. That's about the number that Simpson-Bowles came up with. The second part is the tougher part. We need to figure out the ratio between taxes/revenue and spending and entitlement cuts. That's going to be a tougher one to negotiate back and forth, and maybe the election, as much as anything, will decide how that comes out. The third thing we have to do is to figure out how we achieve it on what timetable. We can't do it before December 31st. If it involves changing the tax code dramatically, that takes a lot of time. So we have to plan into the new year how we can achieve this with the certainty, the era of certainty, that people outside will say they're serious. They're not going to try to delay this anymore.
I've heard some Democrats suggest maybe you can get that grand bargain in a lame duck session. You don't think that's possible?
Only the broadest outlines. The detail parts. How much and how will you change the tax code? How will you change the entitlement programs? That's going to take some serious hard work by the Finance and Ways and Means Committee. It can't be done in a matter of days or weeks. I personally think it's a 6-month undertaking. But I also think that we need a down payment going into that 6 months. We need to give an assurance to those who are skeptical, and they have a right to be skeptical, that we're serious about it. So if during the lame duck we can come up with a down payment which shows we're serious and a consequence at the end of 6 months for failure that is serious, I think people will respond to it in a favorable way.
You sound a lot more optimistic than John Boehner was earlier this week when he said he's not very confident that a deal can be reached.
Well, I hope John's wrong. I feel more confident in talking about the Senate in this context than the House. The Senate has been much more bipartisan than the House in dealing with this. Now, it's true, we haven't solved it. We didn't come up with a solution in the Senate. But when we call a meeting of senators who believe the Simpson-Bowles Commission model is the right starting point, and 46 senators show up, equal numbers from both parties, that tells me that we have a good starting point over in the Senate. I don't know if Speaker Boehner would have the same experience if he did it in the House.
Do you think the defense cuts that are now on the table are finding the leverage you all have been looking for to force Republicans to truly consider revenue increases? Is that what's changed?
Listen, there's plenty of leverage in the cliff. On my side, domestic discretionary cuts, after already taking $1 trillion out over the next 10 years, to hit it again for $600 billion, it could be devastating to many of the things that are critically important, like college loans and student aid. On the other side, of course, they're concerned about defense cuts and what that might mean to the security of the United States and to jobs in a lot of the different states. But don't forget the tax code. The tax code hits us all. It isn't just ending the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest, it's ending the tax cuts for everybody. You just go right on down the line to the lowest income tax payer. They're going to see an increase in taxes if we don't do something about the cliff.
Republicans, John Boehner again, said the president, absent without leave here. He has not shown leadership. He has not offered a solution yet.
You know what would happen if the president announced tomorrow what his plan was? It would be summarily rejected, first by Romney and then by every Republican as a campaign ploy. He's not serious. Why didn't he come up with it before? Listen, this is a highly charged political environment right now. And I don't think anything serious is going to happen publicly before the election. But the day after, if the president's reelected, I think the wheel's going to start churning.
What's your message to contractors out there in your home state of Illinois, those who work here in Washington? How are they supposed to plan for their businesses given the state we're in right now?
It would be foolish to ignore the possibility of the cliff. But my advice to them is prepare for the worst, but hope for the best, and do something to help us. Reach out to your member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, and say, we need a bipartisan solution to our deficit mess. No excuses. Get it done. And do it in the lame duck, at least a preliminary part of it, and then the first 6 months of the year, get serious about coming up with an answer.
You talked about the president's chances for winning re-election. Clearly you're confident there. Coming out of the conventions, has the tide turned in the president's favor?
It's positive. Some of the poll results we've seen across the country are very encouraging. But this is an extremely close election. 9 states will decide the next president. And the margin within those states, and some of them, is 2 or 3 points. So there's a thin slice of the electorate, undecided, independent part of the electorate, that will make a decision in the next 7 or 8 weeks.
My thanks to Senator Dick Durbin. After the break, not all cuts are created equal. We'll map the sequester pain in battleground states, Bloomberg government's exclusive analysis. And later, putting words in your mouth for a price. This is Capital Gains. I'm Peter Cook. As we just heard from Senator Durbin, coming to a deal to protect the nation's fiscal health will be painful. But politicians may end up paying the highest price of all. Our latest Bloomberg government analysis shows that when it comes to the automatic budget cuts, some of this election's battleground states will have the most at stake. Assuming there's no deal on the fiscal cliff, $1.2 trillion in automatic cuts will force federal spending to plummet. Much of the pain will be felt in Virginia, home to the Pentagon. 14% of Virginia's GDP depends on federal contracts, more than any other state. Not far behind is New Mexico, where 8.9% of this battleground state's economy is tied to the federal government. Next door, Colorado's $10.2 billion in federal contract dollars accounts for nearly 4% of that state's economy. Virginia, New Mexico, Colorado, 3 of the 9 states that could really decide this election. Let's take a deeper dive off the fiscal cliff or into the fiscal cliff with Bloomberg government analyst Rob Levinson and Heidi Prisbilla, who covers Congress for Bloomberg News. Thanks to both of you for being here. Rob, let me begin with you. You've taken a really hard look at this fiscal cliff, the automatic budget cuts set to kick in. How painful is this really going to be for these federal agencies? Is the sky really falling?
Well, Peter, no, I think the sky really isn't falling. I mean, there's some pretty harsh metaphors out there, things like doomsday and the end of the world and, oh my God, the fiscal cliff on January 2nd. But in reality, I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as people want to make it. On the defense side, you know, a lot of these cuts, even though they'll be cut about $55 billion in fiscal 2013, a lot of that money would have been spent anyway in 2013. About half of it is actually all that you would feel in 2013. And then a lot of that is what they call operations and maintenance funding, meaning the big contractors who make the big weapon systems won't feel a lot of that pain. On the non-defense side, you're talking about, of the 15 agencies that we studied, about $9 billion in contract spending would go away. And that's certainly significant, and it will affect these programs a bit. But, you know, you're talking about $9 billion out of about $100 billion in contract dollars that those agencies spend in a given fiscal year.
Rob, we've heard a lot from the contractors, particularly the defense contractors, worrying about the pain that they're going to be feeling. They're going to have to put layoff notices out there, potentially warn employees that they could be laid off down the road. What about their perspective, and how are they preparing for it?
Right. Some of the CEOs of the big contractors, companies like Lockheed Martin and others, have said because of what's called the WARN Act, they may have to send these notices 60 or 90 days in advance of January 2nd, indicating that people may be laid off. Right now, we're not seeing a lot of layoffs that you can directly sort of attribute to sequestration, but we are kind of seeing a slowdown in hiring. A lot of contractors are sort of postponing people that they might hire. They're postponing some investments, and they're sitting around kind of waiting to see if a deal might be cut and hoping that it will. But if it isn't, then they'll start having to talk about letting people go.
Well, let's talk about the possibility of a deal. Heidi, you've been up on Capitol Hill this week. What are you hearing? Is there something brewing behind the scenes?
Before the election, absolutely nothing. Peter, this week we are expecting Congress to pass a bill to essentially keep the government up and running, and then I would imagine a lot of them actually have their bags already packed to leave town and go to their respective corners for the election. However, I don't think it's as bleak as some reports make it out to be. I met with a number of aides to leadership in both the House and the Senate, and at least in the Senate, there is a very big group of senators, bipartisan, who are working and meeting regularly on some kind of a framework that they want to toss out there once the election, the heat of the election is over, that they can try and agree on. And I just noticed a change in the mood. Peter, I talked with a number of senators, one in particular, Jim DeMint of South Carolina, big Tea Party leader, and I was surprised to hear him say, if President Obama is reelected, we're going to have to cut a deal on taxes. I've covered these commissions going back to Bull Simpson. I don't think he would have said that 6 months ago. Yeah. So I do think there's a change.
A change and a deal in a lame duck, or is it going to have to wait for 2013?
It depends on who's elected. So we have two scenarios, right? We see a President Romney is elected, and in that case, the Republicans that I talked to said that there's very little incentive for them to actually cut a deal with Romney when they could do some kind of a stopgap measure to, you know, put off the cuts and extend the tax, put off the automatic cuts and extend the tax cuts into the new year, and then cut a deal on their terms with a Republican president. However, President Obama is reelected, very different story. A lot of the Republicans are saying that they would possibly even go beyond what Senator Durbin has been saying over the past week or two about a 6-month deal and really focus on some kind of a framework. The president is going to be at the height of his political capital, fresh off an election victory. That's going to be the moment for him to strike a deal.
All right. Heidi, Rob, thanks to both of you keeping track of the fiscal cliff negotiations here in Washington. Now, the government may be headed for the fiscal cliff, so you might be surprised to find out federal agencies rushing to buy anything they can right now. Call it the September splurge. It's a classic case of use it or lose it, as federal agencies rush to spend unspent money in their budgets before the fiscal year comes to a close September 30th. If they don't, they have to hand it back to the Treasury, and Congress may think twice about forking over the same funds in the future. Over the last 3 fiscal years, a Bloomberg government analysis shows federal contract awards doubled in September, and multiple award contracts, which require limited competition, increased fourfold. The single biggest September spender is, no surprise, defense. We tried to avoid the cliche about spending like drunken sailors, but in September, the Navy's Seaport Enhanced contract alone averaged $1.1 billion and $382 million in all other months. The Navy isn't buying bigger ships in September, but like most federal agencies, it rushes to spend the year's remaining dollars on easy-to-buy items like computers and IT services. They put words in your mouth and get paid handsomely for it. You need to know the West Wing Writers Group. That story coming up. You're watching Bloomberg Government's Capital Gains. I'm Peter Cook in Washington. Whether you're a lobbyist or a candidate, if your business is Washington, you need to reach the right people with the right message. We call our weekly check on lobbying and political persuasion the Influence Index. First up, defense contractor Northrop Grumman arming itself for the budget battle ahead. It's just hired Etherton and Associates, bringing to 14 the number of lobbying firms in its arsenal. Through the first 6 months of the year, the company spent $8.6 million on federal lobbying, 1.5 times as much as it spent during the same period last year. Crossroads GPS, the nonprofit group run by former Bush advisor Karl Rove, has more than just President Obama in its crosshairs. The group spent $2.7 million since September 5th on negative ads targeting 4 Democratic Senate candidates. Through the first 7 months of the year, the Obama campaign spent just over $39.7 million on staff, nearly 4 times as much as the Romney campaign. They also spent more on lawyers, $2 million to the firm Perkins Coie, while the Romney campaign paid $534,000 to Patton Boggs. And you don't need to search hard to find out who Google employees are backing in the 2012 race. Workers at the internet search giant have given $209,000 to Obama through the end of July. Mitt Romney's received just over $5,000.